Hello, this is Written by Murphy with another in the series of An Immigrant's Guide to American Literature. Today I want to talk about The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Nathaniel Hawthorne was an American author, and he published this book in 1850. The book itself is set 200 years prior, about 200 years prior, in a Puritan town. We've talked about in my series about how America is very influenced by the Puritans. Nathaniel Hawthorne himself was the descendant of one of the judges in the witch trials. He was the descendant of one of the judges who was the one that never repented of having put to death people who were judged as being witches. So, Hawthorne writes the book, The Scarlet Letter, and sets it during that time, 200 years earlier, during the time of the Puritans. And the summary is like this. Let me see if I can summarize it quickly. Hester Prynne, the hero of the story, the heroine of the story, is in jail at the start of the novel because the town has caught her with a baby. She is married, but her husband has been gone for years, and therefore it's clear that she's committed adultery. That's a big deal for the Puritans. It's a criminal offense. It's not a sin. At that time, the difference between what was religious and what was civil, there wasn't much of a difference. So the townsfolk put her in jail and had a judge decide what her fate was for this horrible crime. They want her to tell who the father of this child is, and she refuses. There's a bunch of gorgeous symbolism, which I won't even get into. Oh, so beautiful. And so her husband actually comes back to town while she is being released from prison. She is given the punishment of wearing a scarlet A all the time. So she embroiders this A to wear it, as the town has punished her to wear, has condemned her to wear. But she does not wear it as a sign of shame. She makes a beautiful embroidered A, which is broadcasting her ownership of this, that she is going to be herself and she is not going to just submit to shame. She is going to flip the story. So of course, she is part of this story. Her little daughter, who grows up a few years throughout the course of the story, the father of the child is part of the story, and the husband who shows up and confers with her, he retains his identity. So there's so much going on in this story. That's the basic story, and it is a doozy. Now, so the major themes of the story are that there is a whole bunch of judgment. Hester Prynne has been judged, and nobody seems to ever get over it through most of the story. No one's like, well, that happened a long time ago and she's fine now. No, that does not happen. It is a huge amount of judgment on who she is. The whole society has this whole long thing about what's going on with her. But there are layers. Before I get into that, the book itself also has a sort of gothic, spooky, spiritual part, because Pearl, the daughter, is repeatedly referred to as an imp. She has a sort of demonic kind of reaction to many of the things, and she's considered sort of outside of how she's supposed to be. She's inhuman, so there's a bit of gothic going on. The women in the story, Hester Prynne herself is the major heroine. She also interfaces with other women, and they actually give her business. She is kicked out of society, and she goes and rents a house outside of town, and the women judge her like, oh, she's bad. But they admire her handiwork, the advertisement she's wearing on her breast, the A, and realize she knows very well how to make this craft. And so they give her lots of business. But she's still very judged. The women in this book maintain the barrier, the judgment of her. I also want to say there is a meta story. Before we get into the story, Nathaniel Hawthorne describes his life because he says this is a story that he discovered when he had a job in a customs house. I'm trying to find the quote that I want to share. He had a job in a federal house, a federal job helping track imports and exports, which is a very federal job. And he's like, yeah, I worked really hard, and the other people were kind of, they didn't care about much. They just cared about their appetites, and they just were practically beasts because they didn't care about much else. So the story itself is meta because it is talking about America as America. Here we go. It's talking about America as America, not. I talked before about Washington Irving and how he was one of the first stories that became really popular, that his fiction, the fairy tales that he created about America, were utterly fictional and no one would have said they were anything but. Where he was saying, yeah, America is a real country. And so it was more defensive, more still trying to establish America as a real thing. This is far more than that. This is saying America, oh my gosh, I just lost it. America as its own, pardon me just a moment. Here we go. So he begins talking about the custom house, and he's talking about America. Above the custom house where in the story he works, there is a picture of the American eagle. And this sentence is an example of the beautiful writing that he has to show. With a customary infirmity of temper that characterizes this unhappy fowl, she appears by the fierceness of her beak and eye and the general truculency of her attitude to threaten mischief to the inoffensive community, and especially to warn all citizens careful of their safety against intruding on the premises which she overshadows with her wings. Nevertheless, vixenly as she looks, many people are seeking at this very moment to shelter themselves under the wing of the federal eagle, imagining, I presume, that her bosom has all the softness and the snugness of an eider-down pillow, but she has no great tenderness even in her best of moods, and sooner or later, oftener soon than late, is apt to fling off her nestlings with a scratch of her claw or a dab of her beak or a rankling wound from her barbed arrows. That is very critical of the American government. He's not saying, America's a real thing, really, we're real, which is kind of what I felt like Washington Irving was doing, trying to establish an identity for America. This story is already critical of what America is, which I think is extremely American itself. You recall I talked about Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. Part of Benjamin Franklin's autobiography is a continual sense of improvement. He assesses what he's doing and he tries to find a better way of doing it. He looks at the world around him and thinks of ways that it could be better. He's organizing, changing, assessing himself all of the time. Well, this story is assessing the American government and America's society for what it is and saying, there's ways this could be better. Nathaniel Hawthorne himself was part of the Transcendentalist movement. He hung out with them, and they were doing that other thing that is very American, saying, let's restructure society. Let's do it differently. Another famous transcendentalist is Thoreau, who wrote Walden, which I can talk about later. Walden says, stop doing all the things that you think you need to do. He writes about Walden Pond, where he spends a year just doing nothing but existing with nature. So Emerson is saying, look at what we're doing right now. Let's do something different. And that is, in fact, what Hester Prynne did. She redefined her own sense of morality and how she was going to manage her life. After they kicked her out for one sin, which really is rather small, but they were very willing to judge her, she said, okay, if that's what you think, I'm going to do it differently. You can imagine it wasn't a big deal. It is expected that she would stop going to church. I don't think she went to church anymore. And she raised her daughter with her own sense of what was right and wrong. She followed a lot of what society thought. I mean, she taught her Bible verses, etc., which were de rigueur for the time. But she did it differently. Also, there's an interesting American sense of economics, of what it means to better yourself in society, that is really different than books at the time. Jane Austen's novels were already extremely popular and everywhere. Austen died in 1817, and this was published in 1850. So Austen would say, and did say, it is a well-known fact, I'm paraphrasing, it is a well-known fact that a man in possession of a fortune is in need of a wife. So Victorian novels, Dickens was a contemporary of Hawthorne, were all about trying to get up in society. And there was one definition in Victorian society of getting up is making money and looking like you were a noble person. That is not at all what Hester was trying to do. She's like, I'm not going to win at that game. I'm not even going to play that game. And what did she do? She worked. She was a small businesswoman. And her daughter was her walking billboard because her daughter had gorgeous clothes. And her daughter got her all kinds of business. Her and her daughter, who was considered like a representation of a physical manifestation of this sign of adultery, was a walking billboard. So she made it and was so, not only was she not poor, she helped other people who were poor. That's way different than the Victorian English literature that's out there. So American literature is saying, hey, you get to make your own rules. You get to redefine society how you need it to be, which is part of what the Transcendentalists were doing. I think this is an amazing work of American literature. Even if you weren't American, it's a gorgeous book. There is so much going on in this book. It is a fantastic, fantastic novel. It was really popular too. It sold 2,500 copies like in the first print, and they printed another print really fast. So it was the first mass-produced book in America, hugely popular. It has, oh my gosh, it has mystery in it. It's got romance in it. It's got spooky spiritualness. Let's see, it's got the mystery, romance. There's this oppressed heroine. Oh, they were smart. They didn't do any of the, there was no salaciousness to it. There were no sex scenes. That had all happened, so we're not going to go there. And there was this society expectations, these crushing expectations of society on her. That's interesting because that is definitely something that was in Victorian novels and other English language novels. There were crushing expectations for what society was going to do. But here, she didn't buy into that. Whereas all the other ones, they totally did. Dickens' Great Expectations, all about how, oh, he finally won at the game. Hester Prynne won by not playing. So there's so much going on in this book. Hester Prynne is an extraordinary heroine. Oh, I really can't end without talking about the women in the book. Hester Prynne is the major heroine, and how ridiculously unfair it was for her. She did what women are supposed to do, except for this off-scene incident which led her to have a child. She was a perfect woman. This reminds me of Antigone, how Antigone was this perfect woman, and yet she had sinned against society and therefore was put to death. Well, Hester wasn't put to death, but it was almost as if they had wanted to put her to death by putting her out so far out of society that she might not have succeeded in living. So she was a very, very good girl, except for that thing where she had sex with the guy. Whoops. She was a very good girl. And the guys got away with murder. The father of the child, she never told who he was. Society wanted her to know. They're like, tell us. It's interesting that they didn't offer her anything like, tell us and we'll give you a lighter sentence or something. No, they were just like, tell us. And she was like, no. Well, he got away with it. He got away with it to the end. I kind of don't want to spoil it by telling you. He utterly got away with it, except he was tortured. Poor thing. And then her husband, who came back in town, didn't take any societal responsibility for what he did by abandoning her. He said, I'm going to get revenge on the guy who you cheated with. But he doesn't suffer other than internally. Society has nothing to say to them. She bears all of the burdens, which is a very interesting thing, and about how women are treated in society. There's a whole lot of feminist parallels that could come out of this. It's very interesting. There's so much good, chewy things to think about and read about, ponder and draw out and compare in this book. It's a glorious masterpiece. It's still an incredible masterpiece. I talked about Last of the Mohicans being another book that was made into several movies. People just can't stop making Scarlet Letter into movies because it's so good. It is so good. So this one is a book that you really should read. It's beautiful. It's compelling to the very last page. And there's a lot to think about. And it says a lot about America. So that's what I got to say about the Scarlet Letter. Go read it. It's really worth it.